Age of acquisition. Another dimension across which bilinguality can be measured is the age of acquisition. That is, what is the age at which different languages are learned? Now, the age at which the languages are learned are important because that would mean that this would have an impact on the cognitive representation of languages in an individual. So that would mean that this would determine whether a child is more of a coordinate bilingual or more of a compound bilingual. That is, whether the languages that a person has learned, do they express the same function, or do they express the same meaning, or do they express different meanings? Now, this would also mean that this learning of languages, when introduced by the state or by the family, will have an impact on the linguistic ability of the child. It will have an impact on the socio-cultural context itself because of the use of language. It will have this again on a personal level impact on the neurophysical development of the child. So this is also a dimension across which one can measure bilingualism or bilinguality. Now, I would say that this age of acquisition, although it can also be studied as a dimension of bilingualism, but somehow it is more relevant to bilinguality, that is, learning of the languages by individuals. Now, age and context, we are saying, go together, because a child, when he or she learns a language, learns it within the context, and that context is important. So, where does the first language, for instance, comes from? It comes from home. So that is the context of the learning of the first language, and more often than not, you learn the second language at school. But if the community that you're living in, or if your parents are who have different home languages, then you can be a multilingual at home also. Now, there is often a distinction made between child bilinguality, adolescent bilinguality, and adult bilinguality. This would mean that based on age, whether a second language was learned as a child, whether a second language was learned as an adolescent, or whether a second language was learned when one was an adult, would be different. Even within child bilinguality also, there is this distinction made between simultaneous early infant bilinguality and childhood bilinguality, L1 and L2. Now, what is the difference between these two? The difference is that when a child, for instance, learns two languages simultaneously, as I gave the example before, that a child at the same time being in a family in which the family is constantly using more than one language, then the child will learn as a first language, language A and language B. However, while being very young, the same child or any child actually learns this second language very early in life. We call this L1 and L2. So L1 would stand for the first language that a child has learned, and L2 would stand for the second language the child has learned. Now, the assumption over here is that when the second language was learned, then the child had already acquired the basic features of the first language. So that means although the child learned the second language very early in life, yet the child already had a first language to draw upon. Now, simultaneous bilinguality, in which a child actually learns both languages as first language or more than 3 languages as a first language, usually it is unintentional. You don't formally teach the child this language, and these are picked up from the context of home. And in this, usually for different forms, for different functions, the same different forms are used. So the child, when he or she is expressing a meaning, although the child might be using different languages, there is the meaning conveyed is the same. That is, a child is more of a compound bilingual. In childhood bilinguality, we can say that there is a difference between intentional learning, that is, when a child is put in a school, for instance, where he or she is exposed to a second language very early. And there can also be a context in which the child is transferred into a context, for instance, through immigration, that the child learns the second language from the environment. In any case, in such a context, there is a likelihood that there would be a slight difference in the mapping of form and function. That is, the child would be more of a coordinate bilingual rather than a compound bilingual. But having said that, we stick to our original assumption that this is more of a continuum. So a child might be more or less coordinate bilingual rather than not being a coordinate bilingual at all, or not being a compound bilingual at all.